Hello everyone, welcome to Aligning with Purpose, a podcast where we explore themes of finding your true purpose, from quitting corporate, moving cities, practicing holistic health, and more. Join me as we discover our purposes together. My name is Julie Oshinaga, and I'm so happy you're here. Today we'll be talking about apartment hunting in New York City, and the beast that apartment hunting in New York City is. New York City is known to have a very unique, competitive, and just difficult apartment hunting process, and I'm going to walk you through how I did it back in January of 2025, and hopefully these tricks and tips will help you as you find an apartment, or if you're just curious to listen along, this one's for you. Let's get started. I was in Brooklyn meeting up with a friend that was in town from LA, and after we parted, I was waiting at the train station, and at the train station, a stranger came up to me to ask for directions getting to the Met. And to get to the Met from Brooklyn, there are about 2 transfers that you have to take. Conveniently, I was also going in the same direction that he was, so I gave him the directions, and usually I will say I am very wary to talk to strangers who are men, but he gave me a good gut feeling that he was a nice person. So we had small talk just walking from one station to the next platform, and I found out that he also worked in entertainment. He worked in the same industry and that we were able to relate to the toxic environment from our work. We also talked about podcasts, and by the time we had parted and he kept going up to the Met, I noticed that he left a comment on my podcast by the time I had gotten home. Sometimes those small interactions that you have with strangers really goes a long way. It encouraged me to obviously be safe when you're talking to strangers, but sometimes just giving a hand and helping someone out with directions just go a long way and remind us all that it's really about the small moments in our lives. So I've been in New York for about 10 months at this point. I moved in January of 2025, and I want to share with you the process of moving to New York and finding an apartment, because it was definitely one of the toughest experiences that I had looking for housing. And New York is known to have one of the most unique, toughest, and competitive processes to find an apartment. So it's definitely not for the faint of heart, but hopefully these tricks and tips will help you if you're planning on moving here or if you're just curious, because it is quite an interesting one. And before I found the apartment, I decided to sublease for 2 weeks. And that gave me 2 weeks to find a permanent apartment. And during that time, it was definitely very, very stressful. The first week, I was very encouraged and I felt really excited that I was going to find something right away, but that wasn't the case. And a week in, I knew that I had a deadline to lock in an apartment in 7 days, and I was stressing out. Thankfully, it all worked out, so it wasn't a big issue, but it definitely takes time, so I would consider that if you're moving here. In total, we viewed around 12 to 15 apartments in Manhattan, and we eventually found a 3-bedroom, 1-bath, and I'm not going to share the exact neighborhood just for safety purposes until we actually move out of here eventually, but I love our apartment, but it did take looking at up to 15 apartments. I don't remember the exact amount, but it was a lot and it felt like a full-time job. So you have to get ready to commit to that, especially when it's a competitive market. The good thing is, since we looked for an apartment in January, it was less competitive, even though it still is. It is really cold during that time, so not a lot of people are trying to move in the dead of winter as compared to the summer. So the competition is a little bit better, but the inventory, because no one's moving as much, is a little bit lower. So you don't get as many options when you're looking for apartments. However, the good thing is the prices are slightly cheaper too when you're moving in the winter because the demand is lower. So I think we got a really good deal for the neighborhood that we're in, and it really is in the heart of Manhattan. So it's easy to get to Brooklyn. It's easy to travel up and down Manhattan. There are a lot of good train lines and also buses in our area. And as someone who is moving to New York City for the first time, I wanted to really find a place in Manhattan because I just had this gut feeling to move to Manhattan and that I was going to be the happiest here. I am someone who really values trusting my gut feelings and intuition. Even after exploring the other boroughs, I just feel the most at home in Manhattan. And even though it is way more congested and the energy can be chaotic, something about this part of town makes me feel so energized. And after 10 months, I can confidently say that it was definitely the right decision for myself. I knew that coming into living in New York that I was going to give up space, and I do love my apartment and the coziness of it. So you have to really think about what your priorities are when you're coming here because it is going to look different depending on where you're living, what your budget is, and what you decide your ultimate goals are going to be in the city. There are other boroughs that are going to be a little bit more affordable and that are going to provide more space and more amenities. In a blue sky scenario, I would love to have things like an in-unit washer dryer or even like a rooftop where I could host friends, but I'm not going to get that as easily in Manhattan with the budget that I have. But something about being in the heart of the city gives me everything I need for this chapter of my life right now. Because New York has such a competitive apartment searching process, I do want to walk through the whole process and share the things that I learned in my apartment search. Number one is don't sign any lease without seeing it in person first, if you can. This one is going to be tough for people who are moving out of town, but I really, really recommend you to sublease or at least stay here for 2 weeks to a month to get to see the apartments on your own and explore what areas you really want to live in, because each part of Manhattan or even the different boroughs, they're going to be different depending on what neighborhood you're in. So it's going to be important for you to discover that as you're here. And signing a lease virtually or from afar usually is not a great option because you might end up in a worse situation than you anticipated. The pictures, the videos online, they can be pretty deceiving sometimes. And especially when you're looking in a place like Manhattan, a lot of the places in the pictures, they might look bigger than they're advertising. So it's really important for you to see it in person so you know what you're getting yourself into for that year lease. I will say if you can't get here and look at apartments in person, at the minimum, I would get a walkthrough video from your broker or the agent that's trying to get you the apartment, because the walkthrough video would probably show it the most accurately instead of staged photos that are in 0.5 or however the pictures look. Even then, I still recommend you come see it in person if you can. I would bake that into your schedule when you're moving here. With our apartment search and seeing 12 to 15 apartments, I will say the pictures and videos looked great on StreetEasy and apartments.com and other platforms that we used, but after we got to the listings, there were definitely more than a handful that didn't really look like what was advertised, so it was definitely the right call for us to see it in person. The next tip I'm going to give is about brokers and brokers' fees. Some people decide to go through brokers when they're looking for an apartment in New York City, but this can be a pretty pricey option. If you use a broker, they will usually charge you a broker's fee, and it can be anywhere from your first month's rent price or up to, I believe, 15% of what your rent is. It is quite a hefty price, and I don't really agree with this system, but that is something that New York has. I was also doing some research earlier today, and it looks like as of June of this year in 2025, brokers can no longer require you to pay them a fee if they listed an apartment on behalf of a property manager. So if that's the case, then you may not be charged a broker's fee. Since I'm not in the market for an apartment right now, I don't know what the landscape for broker's fees are, but I would definitely just make sure to be aware of that. And if you don't want to pay a broker's fee, just look for listings that list that they don't include that in their fee, because there are definitely apartments that don't charge that as well. For our apartment, we got very, very lucky and we didn't have a broker's fee, but I will share all the things about this apartment when I walk through all the other ones that I also viewed. One of my least favorite things about New York apartments is the flex walls. And if you don't know what flex walls are, they are temporary walls that they install in your apartment for another tenant. And these walls are pretty flimsy, they are hollow, and they also don't go all the way to the top. They're required by the fire department to leave a 12-inch gap from the ceiling, and it just creates an uncomfortable situation for that roommate because there's a lack of privacy and it just isn't a standard bedroom. When they're making a flex room, it usually cuts off a part of the living room to make this room, and that means that this roommate usually doesn't have a closet either. So there's so many cons when it comes to flex rooms, but because New York is so tiny and it's so expensive, it's such a common thing that a lot of apartments do to put in a flex room, so it drives the cost down for already expensive apartments. So when we were looking for apartments, our one non-negotiable was flex walls, and we tried really, really hard to avoid them as much as possible. In most of the apartments that we viewed, they did have flex walls, and we had to start weighing our options and pros and cons and who would take that room and sacrifice their privacy for that year. I will share what we got at the end and what we ended up with, but this is just an unideal situation for that person. But if you're really looking to be on a budget and you don't mind the lack of privacy, this could be a good option for you since it is very common. But for me, as someone who is in my late 20s who values my privacy, that was just a non-negotiable. Moving on, sharing a bathroom between 3 people is very common as well. There are more 2 bedrooms and 1 bathrooms available in the city, but there are also 3 bedroom, 1 bedroom apartments. From my apartment search, I also learned that there are a lot of pre-war buildings in New York City. From what I remember from one of the agents informing us is that pre-war buildings are known to have central heating, so you don't really have a choice on the temperature of your room, especially in the winters. Everything is centralized for the whole apartment, so there's usually a hot pipe that goes through your apartment, and this same heat is emitted into all units. So we have a few in our apartment. There's 1 in each room and also 1 near the bathroom, and this keeps our rooms and our whole apartment very, very warm. But the downside of this is that since you can't control the heat, sometimes it can get really, really hot, or sometimes it's not hot enough. If you want the option to toggle your heat and decide how hot or how cold your room is going to be, then you would have to get possibly a non-pre-war building to live in. Personally, from my experience, the pre-war building hasn't been an issue since that's what we're in right now. Honestly, the heat has been the perfect amount, and in the winters, I don't have to ever worry about being cold in my own apartment, so that hasn't been a big issue for us. Walk-ups are also very common in New York, and I can't remember if this is exclusive to pre-war buildings, but walk-ups are basically buildings that don't have any elevators, and you have to take the stairs to get to your building. That is what we currently have right now. We are on the 3rd floor, so it isn't that much of an issue, but definitely if you are on the 6th floor or the 8th floor or anything above that, it can definitely get tough. Adding onto the list, laundry. Laundry in unit is really hard to find in New York, or if you can find it, it is going to be a very, very expensive apartment, especially if you're looking in Manhattan. So a lot of people opt out for laundry in unit, especially if you're on a budget, but the compromise can be for you to find an apartment that has laundry in the building. Not having laundry in the building at all can be very difficult, especially in the winters when you're lugging heavy laundry up and down your walk up and it's extremely cold. So I think the compromise to not having laundry in unit would be to get an apartment that has it in the building. And if not, then you can also find apartments in different boroughs because it can be easier to find more affordable options that have in-unit laundry in the different boroughs outside of Manhattan. I have a couple more when it comes to New York apartment hunting. And when you're looking for an apartment, one of the tips that I got from my friends that has been here for a long time is that you should look for apartments that are probably not surrounded by a ton of restaurants or that you're directly above a restaurant. Being directly above a restaurant can increase your risk for rats. I don't know how true that is, but I can see why that could be an issue, especially if the restaurant isn't as aware of their food safety. There are already a ton of rats in New York City, and even in the neighborhood that I'm in currently, there are no restaurants, but especially when it comes to garbage pickup days, there are so many rats running on the sidewalks, especially at nighttime, near the trash cans. So I can't imagine what it's like when you're near a restaurant. And I know sometimes it's just unavoidable because New York City, especially Manhattan, is so stacked up right on top of each other. But if you can avoid it, I would avoid living on top of a restaurant. Last but not least, New York apartment hunting is extremely, extremely competitive. And out of the 15 places that we saw, we put in an application for 3 places, and all 3 of them we were qualified for. However, since there were already a couple people ahead of us, we didn't get those apartments since a lot of them are going to be first come, first serve. And the bummer was we weren't even late to the application process. We applied right away, but it's just the nature of the game looking for an apartment here. So sometimes there's going to be people who are ahead of you and they get it in quicker than you, so they just end up getting it first. And by the 3rd time, I just knew in my gut that we had found our apartment, but there was already someone ahead of us, but they hadn't sent in all their application materials yet. So me and my roommates, we just hustled it. We put together our application packet really quickly, and then we ended up beating out the other person, and we ended up getting this current apartment that we have now. So my recommendation is to have all your materials ready because it goes by so quickly, and especially if you're moving in a season like summer, you're going to have so many people that are looking for an apartment and you're competing against all the students that are coming in, and it might be even more difficult to find something that you like. So have all those materials ready, and those materials could look like ID, letter of employment, your last 2 pay stubs, your W-2. If you need a co-signer, then you need to have that information ready from whoever that's co-signing with you. A lot of those times the co-signers can only be a direct family member. So making sure that you already have that person in mind and have talked to that person. In New York, you need to make around 50 or around 40 to 50 times your monthly rent. So if your rent is $3,000, then you need to be making 120 to 150K in annual income. So it is very common for people to use co-signers, and you have to also make sure that the apartment building allows for co-signers if you need that option. I know that was a ton of information, and the last thing I want to say about this search is to start looking about 2 to 4 weeks out from when you want to move. If you start any earlier, they're probably going to be taken, or they want to fill that apartment up really quickly, so you aren't going to be getting that apartment. You can start looking just to see what options that you have, but find that sweet spot of that 2 to 4 week range of when you're moving and schedule all your tours close to each other on the same day so you can look at all of them and get back to the property managers as soon as possible, so you could put in that application as soon as you want the apartment, so you could be the first one to have applied and be considered for it. Now for the fun part, I'm going to be walking you through most of the apartments that I toured in January. And if you're watching this on YouTube, then you can follow along, and I'm going to be inserting some clips and videos, pictures of our apartment search, and show you the behind the scenes of what we saw in our apartments. The first neighborhood that we went to was Tribeca, and this one was a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom. The downside of this place was that it was just a 1 true bedroom, and they added walls, flex walls, to make it a 3-bedroom. So the pro of this place was that it was a very beautiful apartment, and it had windows on all sides of the living room, but it didn't even matter because it was going to be covered in walls, and those windows would be going to the rooms anyway. So the living room space was going to be cut down into a very tiny little sliver, and I don't even think we would have been able to fit in a couch and a table. The biggest con of this place was that The flex walls were going to be shared between two roommates, so the noise would just carry over to both roommates' rooms. And I'm gonna just show you in the picture so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. This place was just not ideal. Since it was one of the first places that we saw, my roommates were very keen to getting this place, but something in my gut was saying that it wasn't the right one, especially because of the flex wall situation. It did have laundry in the building, which was a plus, and there were different types of amenities like a basketball court, a shared workspace room. But when I thought about it, the basketball court I'm actually not going to really use. So the amenities weren't really a big selling point as it looked like. It wasn't as glamorous as it looked. This one did end up having a broker's fee, but we ended up being able to negotiate with our agent. And if we did take this apartment, instead of having us pay a broker's fee, it would go towards the 13th month, and I think he would be able to keep it or something. So there are certain options like that where you might have to pay that broker's fee, but instead you might be able to add on an extra month or two to get your money's worth for it as well. At the end of the day, this apartment didn't work out, but it was definitely for the best. This one was going to be priced at $6.9K a month for 3 people. We did put in an application for the Tribeca location, and it didn't go through because of someone applying ahead of us. But for me, I was very grateful for that because I was just not okay with the flex rooms and for 2 people to be sharing a flex wall. And I'm super glad that this one didn't work out. So moving on, we went to go see 3 apartments in Murray Hill, and I'm only going to be talking about 2 of them because one of them we didn't strongly consider since it was only a 2-bed, 1-bath, and we had 3 roommates between myself and my other 2 roommates. So place number 1, this place was a 3-bed, 1-bathroom, and they were all flex walls. I think this place was a studio that was a larger studio, so they made this into a 3-bedroom, 1-bath. But because of that definitely doesn't provide any privacy for any of the roommates. And this one had a 12-inch gap that was going to be filled with plexiglass. And this one had laundry in building and also a broker's fee that was negotiable at 12%. We didn't negotiate this because this apartment just wasn't fitting our criteria, so we didn't end up moving the conversation further than this. We also didn't get a video of this one since we viewed this apartment while tenants were still in it, and it felt awkward to film someone's home and their space and their things. So overall, this was just not our option. And this one was priced at $5.7K. Place number 2 in Murray Hill was a 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath, and this one had 2 true bedrooms and 1 bedroom that was a flex room. The cons was one room didn't have windows at all, and this was going to also be the flex room. So overall, not a really good option for this 3rd roommate. The good thing was that there was laundry in the building and that there was no broker's fee. They also told us that if our application was strong enough, we would get 2 months free, and that was negotiable. So there were definitely different perks that came with this building or this unit, but ultimately this was also just not the place that we were looking for when it came to location and the overall vibe of this apartment. This place was priced at $7,085, and if we were to get the 2 months free, I believe it would bring it down to $6,495. For the place, location, and everything included, it just wasn't going to be a fit for us. The 3rd location we saw was in Nolita, and we saw 1 apartment here, and this one was a 3-bedroom, 1-bath. The pro was that they were all true bedrooms, but this one was a walk-up, and it was a pretty old building, so it almost felt a little unsafe walking up the stairs. That might be a little common in some pre-war New York City buildings, but something about this building didn't feel safe, and I just didn't get the best gut feeling from this place. The rooms looked okay, but one of them was extremely tiny and the lighting was very, very bad. The other pros of this place was that it would come with an in-unit washer dryer, but this machine was going to be a combination machine, so I've never used a washer/dryer. I don't know how well those work, but the good thing is that it came with the unit. we had the option to also pay $200 a month to have it be furnished. And the other con was that it would come with a broker's fee of 1 month's worth of rent. This one was priced at $6,875, and ultimately it just wasn't a vibe fit for us. The next location was Kips Bay, and I toured 2 places in Kips Bay. Place number 1 was a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom. It's common in New York for us to have a 3-bedroom but 1 bathroom, since a lot of places don't have a lot of space and a lot of them are flex rooms anyway. So this one having an extra bathroom was definitely a plus. The con was definitely having 1 flex room again, and the pro was having washer dryer in the building at least. If you can tell, the common theme is having flex rooms for most of the places that we were seeing. So I think it was making us feel a little bit discouraged to find the right apartment, but we kept looking, and more on that later. This building also didn't have a broker's fee, and it was priced at $6.9K. Place number 2 in Kips Bay was a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom, and the pro of this place was that it had a washer dryer in unit. They also didn't have a broker's fee, and it also had no application fee. There's only a $500 holding fee, and we would only have a $1,000 deposit, fully refundable. Most places you have to pay your first month's rent and a deposit right off the bat, and a lot of the times you might not get back this security deposit. So it was a real steal here, where it was only a $1,000 deposit and they would give that back to you at the end of your lease. On top of that, new residents get 1 month free, and there was a lot of amenities and perks for this one. This one was priced at $7,020. I thought this place was great, but when it came to looking for an apartment with my roommates, we had to really agree on location and all the details that this one just ultimately didn't work out, and we couldn't come to a consensus on this one. There's actually a 3rd place that we saw in Kips Bay, and it was really dark that I didn't feel encouraged by this one at all. So I took some videos that I'll insert right here, but I don't have too much information on it since I was not really considering this one. This one was priced at $6.9K. We saw 1 apartment in Midtown, and this one was a 4-bed, 2-bath. And this one came with 2 true beds, 2 flexed walls with plexiglass, and 1 bedroom would have no windows. So it would be more like an office space if you wanted it to be. There was also a washer and dryer that was a combination in the unit, so there was some pros to this building. It was also on the cheaper end when we were looking in Manhattan. It was $6K for the 4-bed, 2-bath. After we toured the apartments, I was pretty set on this place, but after talking to my roommates, we decided not to move forward with it since Midtown can be a very busy area, and we wanted to see what else we could find. The next place that we saw was the Upper West Side, and this one was a 3-bed, 1-bath, and the pros of this place was that it was a 3 true bedroom, so that means no flex walls and they're all true bedrooms, and also that it came with a washer dryer. That is a rare combination, and this one seemed like a really, really good option. It was a walk-up, but it didn't feel like it was going to be too terrible since it was on the 2nd or 3rd floor. The only con of this place was that it had a broker's fee of 1 month's rent, and we wouldn't be able to negotiate that to get an extra month. The price of this place was $7K, and we also put in our 2nd application into this unit, but we unfortunately didn't get this apartment since there was someone ahead of us in this one as well. Ultimately, I'm kind of grateful that it didn't work out here either. After I thought about it, I just didn't get a good energetic feel to this apartment, and as someone who is a little bit sensitive to energies, I felt a little uneasy in that building. There wasn't anything wrong with it, but I just didn't feel comfortable in there. So I'm glad that this one also kind of fell through, but it was definitely making me feel stressed because at this point we had looked at around 10 places or more and nothing was locking in, and we were quickly approaching the 1-week mark to find that apartment. Now down to our last couple locations. We also saw units in Stuytown, and we saw 3 different units in Stuytown, and this one was a really good option because it's affordable housing and there's only a small fee when it comes to the deposit. I think you get all of that back as well, and everything that we saw was also a true bedroom. They also have amenities and washer dryers in the building, and everything pointed in the direction that it was going to be a great fit for us. However, the only con was that I got a really bad vibe from the management company, and the person giving us the tour, he was just very passive aggressive and not very kind, and that did paint a bad picture for me, because if my experience touring the apartment was going to be a bit on the negative end, I couldn't imagine what it would be like living there and having maintenance issues or any other issues that we needed to be solved. So I did have that in the back of my head, and as we discussed with my two roommates, we decided that this was just not the option for us, just due to various reasons. Ultimately, we just did not go with this option. And last but not least, I'm going to be sharing the apartment that we did end up going with. And this one is our dream apartment. I'm so grateful that we found this one. I won't be sharing the location just for safety purposes since we still live here, but this one was a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom, all true bedrooms, and there was no broker's fee attached to this apartment. It felt like a very safe and comfortable neighborhood. I had just a really, really good gut feeling. As soon as we did the tour, walked into the apartment, I had this feeling that we had found our apartment. So we were urgent to get our application in, and I'm so glad that my roommates also felt the same way about this apartment. The interesting thing is that there's no laundry in the building or in the unit, but the reason why we did end up going with this one was because they gave each of us a $1,500 stipend for Rinse, which is a app or a service where they pick up your laundry and they deliver it to you. And they gave us $1,500 for the whole year, so we could give our laundry to this service for it to be washed and for it to be delivered right back to our door. It was very unique, and we got lucky with that option, and I'm so grateful that this one came with that, since we wouldn't have considered it if it didn't have at least laundry in the building. It is a walk up on the 3rd floor, but it hasn't really been an issue since moving here, and it's only 4 flights of stairs that are very short, so it's been quite seamless being in this walk up. This one was priced $6.7K, and overall we had just such a good intuition about this place, and I'm so glad it worked out. The background that you see in this video is this apartment, and even though my room is extremely tiny, I feel cozy in here, and I knew that I was going to be trading space when I came from LA to New York, so I feel good about this decision, and for my first New York apartment, I am very, very grateful. On a last note with all the apartments that we did see, we did tour a few more apartments after this one, just in case this one fell through and there were other people ahead of us. But after seeing this one, our hearts were so set on this that we had to get this one, and we were super quick to send it in, and thankfully it worked out. So this is our process of finding a place. It definitely took a dozen of apartment viewings, and I still wouldn't trade that experience for the world, because we got the dream apartment and the hard work definitely paid off. Overall, apartment searching in New York has been extremely stressful, but if you want something to work out and you put in the time for it, you can really make it work. It is going to be a daunting process, but trust me, as with anything in life, if you put the time in and the effort in, it will pay off and you will get the benefits. You just have to do it and put in that work. Just because the apartment search is hard, that doesn't mean you should settle into an apartment that you don't like, because you're going to be stuck there for a year, and your house is really your temple, and it should be somewhere that you feel most comfortable in and that you feel like you could relax and be your full self in. So if you don't get that, then you have to trust your gut to make sure that you're making the right decision for yourself. And of course, you're going to have to make some sacrifices because New York is a very expensive city, but consider all the things and just don't sign into something just because you feel like you have to. Keep looking, find the right option for you within your means, and something will definitely work out. So obviously we had to make some compromises, so be prepared to make compromises and also really chat through with your roommates honestly too, since you don't want to people please and also get yourself in a situation that you don't want to. So have good communication with the people that you're going to be living with, because it's also your place, it's their place, and it's important for all of you to feel comfortable, even if you don't get all the things that you want. Just as a recap, be prepared, have the proper timing when it comes to your apartment search, and have all your application materials ready so you can be the first one to turn it in to get your dream apartment. Thanks for joining my journey in my apartment search, and I hope you find your dream apartment, or if you're not looking for an apartment in New York, I hope you just enjoyed seeing what it's like finding an apartment in New York City. Thank you so much for spending time with me on Aligning with Purpose. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast so you never miss an episode. And be sure to connect with me on Instagram and TikTok at aligningwithpurpose.pod and at Julioshi, JULIYOSHI. If you enjoyed today's podcast episode, please leave me a rating and review. Your support truly means the world, and catch you at the next one.